Hi everybody, welcome to Methods Week 6. Today we are going to be talking about how to place buildings onto, within, and through your topography. Alright, let's get started. Okay, we are going to start this week with the stepped topography that we made last week, and we're going to talk about how you can take a model from another file of a building and put this on the topography and actually have it interact with the topography, not just drop it in place. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to figure out what file we're going to bring in here. So I have also opened in a separate window of Rhino a project that I want to bring in. Right? So this project has a name. I'm calling it Demo Building for Topo. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import this model into my Rhino model. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to go to File, Import, and when you do that, you can come in and find your file wherever you have it held, ideally in your OneDrive. Find that file, here it is, Demo Building for Topo, and just hit Open. And then Rhino is going to bring that model into your file. Now you might find that that file is not sitting right on your topo like mine is. It happens to be that mine is at 000 and the model here is near 000. That's how they ended up in the same spot. But when you bring in a model imported, it'll be all selected, which you can tell by it being yellow. So if you don't see it, you can always do zoom selected. So zoom Z selected S, hit enter, and it'll zoom into your model. Now, one thing that's really important when you're bringing a model in to another model is before you do anything else, you want to group that model so that you can move it around as a whole solid object. So I'm going to group it. So Control G, group, etc. Now I can unclick it, and now I have a model that I can move around and do whatever I want with. Okay, so that's the basics of importing a model. It's really that simple. You just have to find the file and bring it in. Now, something else you might want to think about is if you have, say you have your model in the file, but there's also a bunch of other, say, junk in the model, or previous iterations, or for this assignment, all the JPEGs that you brought in. So maybe you actually want to just bring the building in and not all that extra stuff. So this is a good chance to use the ExportSelected. So instead of bringing in this model in this file, what we can do is we can create another file, and that is just the building. So what you can do is you can go to File here and ExportSelected. And what it'll do is it'll ask you to select the objects to export. So in this case, I'm just going to select my building. Make sure I have it all selected. I'm not going to select this extra stuff over here. It'll just hit enter when I selected everything I want to bring. And then I can create a new file. So new building, no extras. Okay. And then if I go and I look at what that file is, if I open it up, we'll not worry about this for right now. Maybe we'll save it, yes. But you can see there, no building, new building, no extras. Let's open it up. And here you can see it's just the building model. So that's super useful for taking a model or part of your model and dropping it into a completely different file without having to open and close a bunch of stuff. Okay, so that is importing your model and exporting part of your model to a separate file. So import and export selected. Okay, so now going back to our topo model, now we have our building and we have our topography. And this piece of topography I gave you is about an acre. So this is a tiny little pool house that I'm demoing with. And I can put it in a lot of different spots on the model. So if I'm trying to figure out where I want to put it, this is a really good time to split the screen so you can see where your model is relative to the site. So you can come in, you can move it around left and right to decide whether you want it on the steep part of the model, on the lower part of the model, right? So you can use all these different elements to kind of decide generally where you want to put it. I think we should go for something dramatic. So I'm going to actually put it over here on the steepest part of the site. Actually, let's put it up here where it's steep, but there's still some property around it. Okay, so we don't have to have it perfectly aligned, but what we do want to do is get it generally where we want it. So you can see here, it's where we want it horizontally, and then vertically, it looks like we're sitting generally within it. Okay, so once we have that, then what we can do is we can go into the model, and then this is where we want to make sure we have our snaps on, and we can snap and move our model so that it snaps to one of the points along the topography line. So you've got intersections, you've got perpendiculars. You could also turn on, I have my points on. So say we want to put it right here at this curve. So now I can see, if I do a zoom selected, now I can see that my model is touching a point here and kind of floating over everything. Okay, so however, that's not how buildings work, right? So we need to look at a couple different options. So first, I'm going to look at an option where we actually set the building into the landscape. So I'm actually going to rotate this. If I go back to my top view, I'm going to rotate this so it's actually facing. I'm going to turn off my ortho so I can rotate it at an angle. So it's facing downhill. So remember how we talked about where the lines are closer, they're steeper. Let's try that again. And if you run something perpendicular to the steepest lines, you're actually interacting with the steepest part of the site. So there you can see it. So now, instead of sitting on the site, so I'm here at this topo line, let's see what happens. I'm going to move it whole numbers. Let's see if we can get it set so that porch right there is even with one of these topo lines. So I'm going to say let's try to start with moving it down, say 3 feet. Okay, 3 feet, we're close. Looks like maybe we need to do about 2 more. And now, look at that. Now our building's set so that our porch here is flush with this topographic line. And now the whole building is set inside of the hill. Okay? So maybe I want to move that back a little bit and adjust it, but generally speaking, I've got it where I want it. Okay? So now, once I've done that, what I want to do is I want to come in and actually want to cut the topography, because if I hide this building, the topography is still there. And what I want to do is I want to cut the topography out. Last week we talked about cut and fill. So this is the idea of cut and fill. So what we can do is we can do a couple different things. So let's look at the different ways that we can cut this object in the landscape. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the difference tool to difference out my building from the topography. So let's see what happens when we try to do that just with the building as it is. We can use the difference, Boolean difference here. Let's just start with one of these topo lines, topo layers. Click on the surface, hit enter to continue, and then try to subtract out the building. And you'll see that my Boolean failed. And that's because there's so many different pieces to my building. So this is a good time to actually ungroup my building. But before I ungroup it, I want to make sure that I can control it. So you can see over here, I have a boatload of layers for this building that came in when I brought it in. So what I actually want to do is I want to create a new layer. I'm going to call it imported house. And then I'm going to put all the layers that came with that into that folder. That way, if I ever want to turn the house on and off, I can turn on imported house, but it still retains all of its layers. Okay, so that way I can ungroup it and start to use these layers to slice into the landscape. But if I ever want to either regroup it, hide it, or do anything else with it. I have everything much more in control. So let's go in and let's try to use the difference tool now. So I have difference, select the topo layer, right click, these walls, enter. And then you can see by that hovering, and if I isolate this layer, you can see I've cut a little bit into it, but there's still a bunch of stuff to deal with. There's a bunch of land. So let's just cut through all of these layers and do that. So I'm going to, again, use the difference tool. And I can do a couple of these at once. So I can select that to subtract with. You can rotate around to the other side, select that. You can, basically we're looking for any part of the building that's touching the topography that we're trying to cut. So we've got a back wall here, and then this pink wall. So let's just see what happens if we do that. Right click. Looks like it did a lot of work. So let's isolate these layers that we cut through. Isolate. Let's look at these. Okay, so what's pretty cool is we can see that we've taken a chunk out of the site. And I think the last thing we really want to do is get rid of this middle part. Most of the rest has gone away. So we can do that by just the same techniques we've used before. We can extrude a surface. It's one of the nice ways to work on an angle. So if I want to extrude the surface, nope, not that one. We can come in and actually, this is one thing I do a lot, is I build a box and I use it to get rid of something else. So I'm going to build a box on top of that layer, and then I'm going to use it to difference. And that should get rid of most of these layers. So now I have, if I unisolate, now we can see I've got all of these layers and the building in place, and there's actually a little bit of that layer left. And then I have my building and my front porch. And then a good house, if I select all of these layers, better if your building is not a million layers when you're in this process, but that's okay. If you want to select everything in this model, you can select all of these parts, select objects, and then group it again. And then you can come in and you can hide it. Hide those, and you can see what is left. So you've got a couple extra pieces here. So you're just going to keep working until all of the pieces are gone that you wanted to get rid of. Okay, and then let's check and see what this looks like in other views, because it looks like that layer got a little bit distorted when we did some of that slicing. See what's happening there? It's a little bit distorted. So we might want to rebuild that layer and re-topo it, re-extrude it, which we should be able to because we have the model. But overall, we've got a nice cut and fill here that our house is sitting on. So let's turn that back on. Look at that. Pretty cool. Oh, if you have Arctic, there's glass in the window, so it looks like a nice little house. There's even toilet paper in there for you to get into the details. You don't have to do that. So that's cutting the building out into the landscape. Okay. So let's go into next option. Okay, I have now undone everything that we just did, and we're going to look at a different way to situate the building into the landscape. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at putting this building up on a platform, which requires moving the landscape around or creating new landscape. So if you remember, I started here where the building was sitting up and floating. So we could do, instead of pressing it down, we could actually build up the ground plane. So I'm going to actually come in, I'm going to create a new layer called New Topography. So in this assignment, you can do a combination of building new land and altering the land that's already there. You can build new architecture. You can alter the architecture that's there. But let's just look at creating some new topography. So I'm just going to grab, just for example, I'm going to grab a point on the topography my building's sitting on, and I'm just going to make a box that slides down into the landscape. So if I look at that box, now I have a building that's actually sitting, not quite, that box needs to go up 1 more foot. Now I have a building that's sitting on the landscape on an elevated platform. Maybe that platform sits something more like that. And maybe we actually stretch it a little bit. I'm going to do a scale 1D on the corner to have it go a little bit deeper so it's actually fully buried. There we go. Okay. So that's my building in the landscape. And maybe I actually want also some kind of element that extends that porch. So I could take that surface and extrude it way out into the landscape, like an amazing bridge. Okay, so now I have a platform and that surface, but the platform's pretty rigid. So how do we make that platform look a little more natural? So basically we need to come in and create a few of our own topo lines. And we can do that by building off of the topo lines that are already here. And basically this topo line right here, we're building that out. And then we can build a couple of other ones of these out and create a series of curved surfaces. So maybe instead of looking at this in perspective, we should be looking at it in plan. So let's go to top view. Right, so in top view right now we can see the curves of the topo lines we already have. So one thing we can do is we can take new polylines and we can start to draw them around the corners of this building. Now let's look at what that looks like in perspective. We should have, now we have a curved line that's sitting at that upper layer, and we can start to move these points around in space. Okay. Then we can start to craft new topo lines. So we've got those. Maybe we want to offset those topo lines every 24 inches. And we can line them up with the topography below. So let's just look at this one and move it down a foot so it lines up with the topo line below. This one we've moved down 2 feet. And what we can do, we can hide this platform we created. And we can take each of these lines and we can close them. So we can use the close curve. And then we can extrude them. They should be lining up with the other topo line. So if you get this, you just want to move it down a little bit, -12. We can do the same thing here. We can take this and trim it at this topo line, trim. We already closed this. Let's close this curve. And then let's try extruding that. There you go. Try this one. And then you can see, if you keep doing that as you move down the site, you start to get a topography that's stepped. I'm just going to do a couple of those really quickly. Each of these I'm going to move down so that they line up with the topo lines below. So I'm just doing the same thing over and over again. I'm creating a new set of topo lines and extruding them. So I'm creating like a little micro topography. And that is where I need to do one more. I just want to do that until I'm lined back up with the rest of the topography. And there you've got, if we look at it in Arctic, we can kind of assess what's going on here. So that feels a little bit more interesting. Maybe this is a little much for right now, but now we've got this house. Maybe the house moves around a little. Arctic's a good way to assess things. We've got a little bit hanging off here, so we might want to do one more layer or cut that layer back. But now we've got new topography, right? So once we've got this topography made, we want to clean it up a little bit because we've got some funky things there. And you can see when we look at it in shaded mode, we've got a couple other funky things going on. So what you would want to do is grab the two topos that are in the same layer, isolate them, and then you can trim one out or grab the other one forward. You could kind of clip out a part of it that you're not liking. Maybe we come over here and we just get rid of this corner. Maybe we don't have to, it's up to you. Maybe you like that corner. Just move it up, and then I'm just going to difference this out. Look at that. So now I have a topo that is combined. Let's unisolate. That looks better. And then we can keep doing that. We can subtract this topography out of this one. So select, difference. It's just good practice to not have many layers of curves on top of each other. Okay. And also what's nice about this is if you were to, someone were to ask you how much fill do you need for this project, you're coming in and you can say, I can select my new topography, I can hide everything else, I can do an isolate, and I can figure out that much is what I need. That's all the fill that I'm adding to the site. Okay? So that is altering your site with adding. Okay, now we're going to look at a third way that is a combination of both sinking into the topography, making new topography, and altering the architecture to do this assignment. So I'm going to take the house here, and I'm actually going to move it over to the steeper part of the site, and I'm just going to pop it over onto the end, and then I'm going to go back and do what I started at the beginning, which is to look at the building over the site. That seems like a pretty good spot right there. So let's go back to the perspective view and see what we are close to. Now, if I can't tell exactly where my object is on the site, what I can do, and what I like to do, is use a box and use it to find where I am. So if I take a box from that corner and I click over to some point, I can see, in this case, the top or the bottom of the corner of the building is at the same line as that piece of topography. So I could actually move that building back over to here, or if I wanted it to sit on the next layer down, I could move it down